Ladies and gentlemen, welcome today. Now, for the next few weeks, we are going to have a departure from our usual programming here. This audio sounds weird. All right, just going to roll with it. We're going to have a little bit of a departure from our usual programming. I'm on vacation. Oh, I'm leaving for a vacation in 2 hours. Kirk is already on vacation and will be on vacation again. So this week you get one episode with just me. Next week you get an episode without me. And then the week after that, we also have one episode, but it's Kirk and I. So 3 straight weeks of only one episode, and then we're back to our regularly scheduled programming. So bear with us during that time. If you don't hear this until later, don't panic. Hopefully, I mean, that's after the fact, but one per week. Nothing else is amiss. We are just taking family vacations. So bear with us with that. And today is going to be a short one. This is a Training Tuesday. And today I want to kind of do the exact opposite of what Training Tuesday usually is. Usually it's about a semi or very science-based topic. And we try to use it to inform you on how to better implement that science-based topic, or at least things with a lot of research behind them, even if they're not entirely science-based. Today's the opposite. Today is entirely based around feelings. So this episode is for people who are not necessarily people who want to have a bunch of tech, or people who want to feel like they are beholden to their watch or their heart rate monitor or their pacing, or someone who just wants to get more in touch with how to run by feel. So today is all about running by feel. It's not about pace. It's not about any metrics, just about feeling your own stride. And the reason I want to do this is because it's race season. Spring is almost officially here. Races have kicked up. We've had several athletes race. And the feedback we're getting from a lot of athletes is that it's hard for them to feel the race. That's natural, especially early in the season. But one of the reasons, as we get better and better at science-based training, that sometimes racing becomes more difficult is that for us, the everyday person, we are not time trial racing, but pros often are. And the training is based around the pros, and the science is based off the very highest end athletes. And then they get out into these very controlled environment races where paces are predetermined and they know exactly who's going to be in the race and what kind of shape they're in. And there is a rabbit, or there is wavelight, or there are pace groups. Most of you don't have that benefit. And so for us, it's a very distracting experience to be in a race when we are based off of metrics in training. Now, that's not to say that all the other things we preach about knowing what pace and what heart rate and all of these things are important or unimportant. It's to say that if you are solely reliant upon one component to tell you your feedback in race on how it's going, if that thing, heart rate, pace, positioning, whatever it is off, what do you have to fall back on? And so my belief and our belief is that it's important to be a well-rounded runner, and it's just as important if you want to race to be a well-rounded racer. At the pro levels, you see there are people who are great racers, people who are great time trialists. They don't often overlap. So today is all about becoming a great race by feel athlete. And so typically, what do we train off of? You either choose a pace that you're doing your quality sessions on, you choose a heart rate that you're going to try to stick to or under or around, or you choose an RPE, a rate of perceived exertion. And that's the hardest one for most people, but it's the one that probably bridges the gap to this episode the best. But what I want to talk about is stride-based training. There's probably not a book you can find out there that's been written on stride-based training because it's not like a super popular way of training. There are better ways of training out there for most people. But stride-based training, and I'll explain in a minute what exactly I mean by that, is maybe the most intuitive style of training that can get you through the most wide array of race types and situations. And what I mean by stride-based training is running only based on your perceived stride. So this is my blank stride. This is my 5K stride or my mile stride or my marathon stride. This is my aerobic threshold stride. This is my anaerobic threshold stride. Now, those things get very, very hard to dial in, especially as terrain changes. And so it actually becomes less about this is my aerobic threshold stride or this is my anaerobic threshold stride. This is the exertion level in the type of leg and arm engagement in my stride that I can use for a 20 to 30 minute race or a 40 to 60 minute race or a 90-minute race or a 4-hour race or a 100-mile race. Knowing the duration and then feeling what your stride is supposed to feel like so that it can last that entire time is what I would call stride-based training. It's very difficult to describe if you've never felt it. And so all of this kind of has the caveat that you have to start with a metric. In order to initially establish how to do stride-based training, it has to be compared to something. And so for my money, the best way of doing stride-based training is with 5K stride. Now, the 5K stride to me is the fastest compact stride that you can use. As soon as you get past 5K pace, generally people really lengthen their stride or start using their arms more or just change whether they're midfoot or ball of foot. But my belief is that you can run your easy stride, your aerobic stride, all the way up till 5K pace with proper training without a huge variance in how it looks other than you can tell you're going faster. But it doesn't need to be much different. But if you try to go much faster than that, now your stride just looks and feels significantly different. So what I think everyone should start by doing that wants to try stride-based training is you run 5K pace. It could be on a track, it can be on a treadmill, and you just feel that stride. And you do several sessions where you just go by feel. You run the stride at the pace you're supposed to be hitting, and then you do several reps where you just run and try to match that feel and see as you come through, am I touching the pace that I initially started at? So if you want to be a 20-minute 5K runner, you start out by running 20-minute 5K pace. And then you match that feeling to that pace. And then you lead with that feeling and see if you can still run that pace. And you just get a sense for how do my arms move at 20-minute 5K pace? How do my feet strike the ground at 20-minute 5K pace? How much are my hamstrings having to pull through at 20-minute 5K pace? And now you've got your 5K stride. Now you can easily move it back a little bit to 10K pace. You can move it back to half marathon pace. You can move it up to 3K pace or mile pace. But you have a good starting point where this is my fastest compact stride. That's usually around 5K pace. Now, as you become elite, that's not the case anymore. And as you slow down extremely slow, it may not be the case anymore. But generally, I think 5K feel is a very easy to feel stride, but it takes time. And already people are probably asking, why is this even a thing I'd want to do? And it's that when you get into any sort of race, it's very hard to feel your heart rate or your pace early on. It's very difficult to tell what's happening. Oftentimes, your heart rate does not coincide with how you feel because of increased adrenaline of racing. Oftentimes, your pace does not reflect your exertion because of increased adrenaline of racing and having people around you and whatever terrain you're on. And so you might look down and think, I'm supposed to be running 20-minute 5K pace in this race, but it says I'm on pace for 21 or 22, and that doesn't feel right. And immediately you're kind of down. It's really hard to stay up on it and positive and aggressive in the race when your pace is telling you you're not as fast as you thought you were. Conversely, if you look down and you're supposed to be running 20-minute 5K pace and you're at 18 or 19, we tend to believe it. And so we think this is actually how fast I am. I knew I was working hard in training. I knew I was better than my workout said. And we don't corroborate with our heart rate or our heart rate's high. And we just discount it and say, you know what? It's adrenaline of the race. It's okay if my heart rate's high. It's not what I'm actually doing right now. And you go with it, and then you either PR or you blow up. When you blow up, it happens rapidly and drastically. But if you have a third data point there, and you can say, is this the stride I've been practicing? all throughout these races, all throughout these workouts, you can kind of calm down and put in perspective those other two metrics. So 400 meters into a 5K race, nothing feels normal. You're in a stampede of herd of athletes, and your stride doesn't cost you anything. You're surrounded by chaos and you're just running on a fight or flight at that point. And it just feels nothing. There's a feeling, but you can't equate it to what you're really doing. But if you can go back to the basics of your stride that you know, which is my hamstrings have to exert this way. I need to be landing at this point underneath myself right now. My cadence needs to be about this. My arm swing, my hands never extend much lower than my hip bone, and they never come up much higher than the top of my ribs here. And so I look down and I'm all over the place, and I can feel that this isn't the stride I've been using. Then you switch back to make my stride feel like it's been feeling in practice, and suddenly race pace comes back into play and your heart rate oftentimes gets in line. And so in those moments where we've been training all by ourselves all winter and spring, and now race gets here and we can't feel anything, I don't trust the pace, I don't trust my heart rate. A feeling of a stride is something that you can teach yourself to know in any one of those conditions. The same thing happens when you head off road. Weird terrain messes with your heart rate, but there's an exertion level to your stride that has to exist for a 30-minute race, whether that 30-minute race is up and down hills, whether it's on technical terrain, whether it's through mud, whether it's on a track, whether it's in the rain, whether it's on the road. You know that feeling in your upper hamstring, that insertion point into your glutes when you're overworking. And if your pace says, yeah, but we're doing great, you maybe ignore that sign. And if your heart rate says, this isn't that hard right now, you may ignore that sign. But if you listen to that spot and say, what is the stride that I know I can maintain for this type of duration that's not going to send me those danger signals, oftentimes you can then override those other two fallacies in your mind and click into a stride that this is sustainable. And then if you find yourself 20 minutes into a 30-minute race, not hurting as bad as you thought and still running a good pace, then you can start moving up again. But that feeling in your stride is something that you can bring to the table every time. So I know this is still sounding pretty gray area, but this is a gray area conversation. And it's something that won't really make sense your first workout. But as you do it 3, 4, 5 times, you start to get the sense of things and you start playing this pacing game. This is why I think it's important to start these type of workouts in controlled terrain, treadmill, track, flat bike path, something like that. So you start playing that game where, all right, this is my stride for X pace. Let's see what I come through the mile at. Let's see what my next quarter mile is. I think it's going to be 90 seconds. Oh, it was a 91. I'm pretty dialed in. Or it was a minute 40. I'm a little further off. Or that was 2 minutes. I have no clue what my stride feels like. All right, I got to run the next one staring at my watch and feeling the stride and dial it back in again. And you play that game until, just like knowing heart rate, you know your stride. We've talked about on here that if you play the heart rate game, always try to guess what your heart rate is. Eventually, you just know every one of your internal signals and you can guess your heart rate within a few beats. The same thing can be done with stride. And I experienced this for the first time moving from track and cross country to obstacle course racing. I had never been a trail racer, and now I'm trail or mountain racing with obstacles, and there's no comparable feeling on the track. There's no comparable feeling in cross country to 1,000 or 2,000 foot climb in the mountains, or a bucket carry and then getting back to running, or running technical terrain. But what I knew were the warning signs in my stride. When I start to overstride and I feel a braking effect, I know I need to get more compact. When I start to let my shoulders fall backwards a little bit, and instead of a slight forward lean, now I'm vertical or further back, I can feel I'm not getting my heel drive anymore. Those were things I could count on. That insertion point, my right hamstring always burns more than my left when I've overreached with my effort. When this is supposed to be 80 minutes worth of stride and I'm 40 minutes in and I'm getting that burn, I know I don't have another 40 minutes. I know I have like 10 or 15 when I feel that type of burn in there. And so that was what I relied on very early on from my first year or so of obstacle course racing until I learned the new rules of how to run an obstacle course race. And that was done through purposeful quality workouts, spent compromised running, and doing the type of things I was going to have to do. But because I'd spent so many years running track in feeling the very intimate and explosive differences between being a tenth or two too fast on a rep and what would happen next, and then having to pay real close attention to exactly how I'm striking the ground and what my arm carriage is like in order to not accidentally go too fast or too slow by a couple tenths, I got very well acquainted with what it felt like to run the proper stride. So people often ask me, like, what should I be thinking about when I'm running with my knees or my elbows or my feet? And I don't really know what I should be doing often, but I know what I shouldn't be doing. And sometimes, like on the track, I know what needs to be happening. I need to be striking this way. I need to have my heels feel like they're coming through like this. My hands need to be lower and relaxed because that controls the tension in my upper body. But that's not really a cue for how to drive power. And I still stick to that. But I think that knowing what not to feel is really, really important in stride running. And so early on, you may not know this is the perfect stride. But when you get away from a sustainable good stride, your body gives you warning signs, and those are very important to know. And they're easy to know. That's not what I want to be feeling. Move back down to this. That's not what I want to be feeling. Move back up to this. And so by eliminating the things you don't want to feel in your stride, my left leg starts to kick out. My right foot starts to turn in a little bit. My knees start to drop in my stride. My heels start to hit the ground more than my midfoot. Whatever that cue is to you, I stop having a forward lean or I lean way too forward. The things you don't want often are easier to identify than the things you do want, especially if you don't have access to a mirror while you're running in the treadmill. And so, again, just to kind of recap, you start with picking a known pace. 5K is easy to do. People generally know what their 5K pace should be. Otherwise, you pick your most known pace and concentrate on running that while feeling the stride. Then you start to pair the stride to the pace. You focus only on the stride and see if you can hit the pace until you can do that in your sleep. And then you start doing it on other terrains, uphill, downhill, technical terrain, whatever your race is going to potentially entail, that's what you do. And you also start up a list of warning signs. When my knee does this, when my hamstring feels this, when my heels indicate this, when my shoulders do this, those are all indications that I'm using the improper stride for what I'm trying to accomplish here. And I found this to be very true when I went back to run my first 1 mile race after my like I was 1.5 years, 2 years into OCR. So I hadn't run on the track or really on the roads other than a 5K since leaving college. And I went back to run a fairly competitive 1 mile race, and I was in really good shape. This was around the time where I was, at the time, a threat for a podium at a world championship level in the young sport of OCR. I was training very hard and with a fair amount of intelligence towards the task, and I had very good fitness. And 600 meters into the race, I started to feel the lactate, that burn, that terrible feeling that you get in your hamstrings sometimes, or quad or gut when you're running a 5K or something too hard. I started getting it in my upper arms and in my forearms, like shoulder and forearm. And I had not felt this ever. And what it indicated immediately was that because I wasn't used to running this stride, I had ignored some very obvious flaws in how I was running the race. I was only focused on staying with the lead group, and I was pumping my arms way too aggressively because I hadn't been doing this type of work. Now, if I had gone into this race thinking, you haven't done this type of work, stick to the stride you know and make it work for the pace you want to run. I would have been doing a systems check every stride for the first 400 meters, making sure, are your arms compact and relaxed? Remember, your hands and forearms are the key to your upper body relaxation. You know that about yourself at any pace. You're an arm-based runner as it comes to driving your stride forward. That's where my upper body comes into play. I feel like I generate pace with my upper body, so I have to fight that. I let that go. I wasn't focused on that. And as a result, what was I doing? Trying to run 420 mile pace when I hadn't run faster than like 450 in 2 years. I was driving with my upper body, and my upper body got really, really tired. And again, this was coming off 5 years of college running. I should know these things. I'd run a ton of 1 mile races, but I stopped thinking about my stride. I was only worried about pace and positioning, and I wasn't thinking about the cost of how I was doing it. And since then, I've been very tuned in to how does my stride feel? I don't care if I'm keeping pace with you. Am I doing it appropriately? I don't care if my heart rate says it's low. Is it a sustainable type of low, or is it the type of low that's going to shoot up pretty soon because I'm not using the most efficient version of my running? Or I get through some technical terrain and I realize I overworked it because I wasn't listening to the cues in my hamstrings or hips of how hard can I work for a 60-minute race and for this section of that. And as a result, I would say that there was a while when I was training hard and trying to pursue running as my career where I was one of the better executors of races. I wasn't the best ever at racing, and I certainly wasn't the most successful, and I didn't win the most big things, but I was able to cut it for a few years just by outracing a lot of people. And most of what that came down to was being in a position with some gas in the tank to make a move in the second half of a race. And that was because the entire first half, I played this game of how can I use the least amount of energy in my stride in order to get to the latter stages of the race. I was constantly analyzing. I've used this imagery before of a technician sitting at an instrument panel inside of some giant machine, and they're just watching all the pressure gauges and the temperature gauges and just keeping tabs on everything, all the alarms, all the gauges, all the dials. That was me as a racer. I'm just constantly monitoring and making sure that everything's staying in the good zone. That if anything starts to creep up, I address it right then, because it's not about running the pace. It's about how you run the pace. And the easiest way to determine how are we running the pace is to look at how is my stride doing. And the only way to know how your stride's doing is if you make sure that that's a cue that you bring into your training, at least during your quality sessions. So not everyone needs to become a stride-based training runner. You don't have to spend every single training session saying, I am only focusing on stride here. I am only going to think about what stride am I running. But you should always be aware of how I'm running, not just, oh, there's another 90-second 400 meter. There's another 90-second. You can run 90 seconds in the 400 a million different ways and never once dial in your mechanical, repeatable stride that you can fall back on in the worst situations in running. So the main takeaway here is be cognizant of your stride. If you want to go deeply into this and make sure that every workout you ever do is only based on stride with heart rate or pace as a check-in, it's a fun experiment to do. And if you're the style of racer who that moves the needle more than relying upon metrics, all the more power to you. Because again, most of us aren't professional runners and aren't ever going to be, and we don't need to split hairs. What we need to do is find a reliable cue to call upon during a race to ensure that we're getting the most out of ourselves for the entire race, not just the first few minutes. There'll be questions with this, so we don't always say this in episodes, but I'm kind of opening up the floor here. Send me messages, clarifying things. I'll do a little follow-up if I need to, but see what you can do with this kind of thing. Thanks for tuning in. Kirk's all yours next week. I will be in Sweden. We'll see you next time.